Margaret Chen had been a nurse for 32 years. At 58, her hands knew the rhythm of hospital life, the steady beep of monitors, the soft shuffle of shoes on linoleum, the whispered conversations in dim hallways. She worked the night shift at Mercy General, where the world slowed down and silence settled like a blanket over the sleeping patients. She didn't mind the quiet. In fact, she preferred it. Margaret had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, blonde hair she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail, and a gentle smile that put anxious patients at ease. She'd raised 3 children on a nurse's salary after her husband passed away 15 years ago. Her kids were grown now, with families of their own, and Margaret had learned to find comfort in the small routines of her work. Room 412 had been occupied for 6 weeks by a man named Thomas Harrison. He'd been brought in unconscious after a severe car accident. No identification at first, just a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, alone on a rainy highway. The police eventually tracked down his name, but no family came forward. No visitors. No flowers. Just Thomas lying still in that hospital bed, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, his face peaceful but unreachable. The doctor said he might never wake up. Brain activity was present, but minimal. They used words like persistent vegetative state and long-term care facility. Margaret had heard it all before. She'd seen patients slip away quietly, and she'd seen miracles too. You never really knew. But something about Thomas touched her heart. Maybe it was the loneliness of it. Here was a man, probably in his early 50s, and no one came to sit with him. No one held his hand or spoke his name. The social worker had found a business partner who confirmed his identity but seemed uncomfortable visiting. Thomas was private, the man had said. Didn't have much family. Devoted his whole life to work. Margaret understood loneliness. After her husband died, she'd thrown herself into her work too. It was easier than facing an empty house. So she started talking to Thomas during her rounds. At first, it was just simple things. "Good evening, Thomas." "It's Margaret. I'm going to check your vitals now." She'd adjust his pillows, smooth his blankets, tell him about the weather outside. "It's a beautiful spring night. The dogwoods are blooming. You'd love it." She didn't expect answers. She just felt he deserved to be treated like a person, not just a patient in room 412. One night, about 2 weeks into his stay, Margaret was humming while she changed his IV bag. It was an old song her mother used to sing, "You Are My Sunshine," simple and sweet. She'd sung it to her own children when they were small. On impulse, she sang it softly to Thomas. Just one verse, her voice quiet in the stillness. When she finished, she could have sworn she saw his fingers twitch, just slightly. Probably nothing, she told herself. Involuntary muscle movement. But still, it made her smile. After that, she sang to him every night, nothing fancy. Old hymns, folk songs, lullabies she remembered from decades ago. Amazing Grace. Shenandoah. What a wonderful world. Her voice wasn't perfect. A little gravelly with age, sometimes off-key, but it was warm and genuine. And in the quiet of those late-night hours, with just the two of them and the sleeping hospital around them, it felt right. "You know, Thomas," she said one night, sitting in the chair beside his bed, "I used to sing to my husband when he was sick. He always said it made him feel less afraid." She paused, remembering. "I think music reaches us in places words can't. I hope you can hear me, wherever you are." The weeks went by. Margaret learned more about Thomas from snippets of conversation. The business partner mentioned he owned a technology company. Something about software and investments. Margaret didn't really understand it all. But she gathered he'd been successful. Very successful. The partner seemed nervous about decision-making in Thomas's absence. "He's a brilliant man," the partner said. But he never let anyone close. No wife, no children. His parents passed years ago. The company was his whole life. He shook his head sadly. "I don't think Thomas was happy, if I'm being honest." Margaret thought about that as she sat with Thomas that night. She sang Danny Boy, one of her favorites, and then spoke to him in the darkness. "Is that true, Thomas? Did you forget to live while you were busy working?" She patted his hand gently. "I understand. After my Henry died, I almost did the same thing. Work, work, work. Anything to avoid feeling the emptiness. But you know what I learned? Connection is what matters. Love, kindness, the little moments. She smiled, even if it's just an old nurse singing off-key to a patient who might not hear her. Spring turned to early summer. 6 weeks became 8, then 10. The hospital administration started having quiet conversations about long-term plans. Margaret overheard the social worker saying they'd need to transfer Thomas soon. There was a care facility across town. He'd be comfortable there, they said, but Margaret's heart sank. She knew what those places were like. Understaffed, impersonal. Thomas would just be another bed, another body to be maintained. She sang to him more urgently after that. Amazing grace with feeling. Somewhere over the rainbow with hope in every word. She told him about her grandchildren, showed him pictures even though his eyes stayed closed. She described the sunset she'd seen that morning walking to her car, painted in colors of pink and gold. "I'll visit you, Thomas, wherever they send you," she promised. "You won't be alone." "I'll make sure of that." But deep down, she worried. She was just one person with her own life, her own family. How could she be everywhere? On a Tuesday night in June, Margaret came in for her shift to find activity around room 412. Doctors, nurses, the neurologist. Her heart raced as she hurried over. "What's happening?" Dr. Patel looked up, his face cautious, but was that hope? "He's showing increased brain activity." "Significant increases. Started about an hour ago." His eyes moved under the lids. "He might be coming out of it." Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. They worked through the night, monitoring, adjusting, watching. Margaret stayed close, even though it wasn't her patient assignment. She held Thomas's hand and whispered encouragement. "Come on, Thomas, come back. There's so much waiting for you." At 3:47 a.m., his eyes opened. Just slightly at first, confused and unfocused, but open. The doctors crowded in with their tests and questions. Margaret stepped back to give them room, tears running down her face. It took days for Thomas to fully emerge. His recovery was slow but steady. Confusion gave way to awareness, then to speech. Physical therapy began. Margaret watched from a distance now, respecting the space the medical team needed. She caught glimpses of him sometimes, sitting up in bed, color returning to his face. A week after he woke, Margaret was walking past his room when she heard her name. "Margaret?" His voice was rough from weeks of disuse but clear. She turned to find Thomas looking at her from his doorway, supported by a walker but standing. His eyes, warm brown eyes she'd never seen open before, held an intensity that took her breath away. "I heard you," he said simply. "Every word, every song." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, no one." He paused, emotion crossing his face. "No one has ever shown me such kindness. You didn't know me. You had no reason to care. But you sang to me every night. You talked to me like I mattered." "You did matter," Margaret said softly. "You do matter." Thomas smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I've spent 53 years chasing success, building a company, accumulating wealth, and I was completely alone. Trapped in darkness, I heard your voice singing about sunshine and grace and wonderful worlds, and I realized I'd never really lived any of it." He took a careful step forward. "You gave me something to come back to. Not just life, but the possibility of a life worth living." Margaret wiped her eyes. "We all deserve that, Thomas." In the weeks that followed, Thomas made a remarkable recovery. But more than his physical healing, Margaret watched him transform in other ways. He started talking to other patients, asking nurses about their lives, remembering names. The businesslike distance melted away, revealing a warm, thoughtful man who'd been hiding behind walls for decades. Before his discharge, Thomas asked Margaret to meet him in the hospital garden. It was a beautiful summer afternoon. Flowers in full bloom, birds singing in the trees. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Thomas said. They sat on a bench together, comfortable in each other's presence. "About what matters. About the time I have left. I'm selling my stake in the company. Let someone else drive themselves to exhaustion. I want to actually live," Margaret smiled. "I'm so glad, Thomas. And I've established something. A foundation in your name, the Margaret Chen Foundation. It will provide music therapy programs for hospitals, fund visits to isolated patients, support caregivers like you who go beyond duty into genuine compassion." Margaret gasped. Thomas, I didn't. You don't need to. I want to, he said firmly. Margaret, I have more money than I could ever spend. Billions, actually. He said it matter-of-factly, without pride. It never made me happy. But using it to spread the kind of kindness you showed me, that might actually mean something. He took her hand gently. You saved my life. Not just by keeping me alive, anyone could have done that. You saved my life by showing me what it could be, by singing in the darkness until I found my way back. Margaret squeezed his hand, unable to speak through her tears. I was wondering, Thomas continued, his voice hopeful, if you might have room in your life for a friend? Someone who'd like to learn about sunsets and grandchildren and all the beautiful ordinary things I've missed? Margaret laughed through her tears. I think I could manage that. They sat together in that garden, two people who'd found unexpected connection in the darkest place. Around them, life continued, nurses changing shifts, visitors coming and going, the eternal rhythm of the hospital. But for Margaret and Thomas, everything had changed. She'd given him songs in the silence. He'd heard them and found his way home. And in the process, they'd both discovered that kindness, simple, genuine, freely given, was the most powerful force in the world. Sometimes the smallest acts of love echo the loudest in someone's heart. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they echo back. 6 months later, Margaret and Thomas established the first Healing Through Music program at Mercy General. Margaret reduced her hours to help coordinate, bringing singers and musicians to patients who needed comfort. Thomas volunteered every week, sitting with isolated patients just as Margaret had sat with him. They became family to each other, not through blood, but through something deeper. Through songs in the darkness and the light they found together on the other side. And on quiet evenings, when they'd visit patients together, you could sometimes hear Margaret's voice singing softly in the halls, sharing the same gift that had changed two lives forever. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.